Welcome to the Association 100 podcast. The A100 podcast is an extension of our Association 100 bi-monthly newsletter that focuses on best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies and tactics that work in the world of associations. The podcast will feature meaningful conversations with association professionals across the country, taking a deeper dive into trending topics, offering insights that both inform and inspire.
Welcome back for our latest episode of the Association 100 podcast. We're coming live from the show floor of the ASAE conference in Atlanta. I'm Megan Henning, and today I am joined by Sean Lichtefeld. Did I get that right?
You got it
All
perfect.
right. Who is the Vice President, Membership and Communication at ANCOR. So welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
This is great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your association and your members?
Yeah, so we are a community of about 2,100 organizations that deliver services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that empower them to be able to live more independently and in the community rather than what is too often the case, which is that they're relegated to institutions.
Yes.
So we have members who provide day program services, job and employment training services. They operate group homes where people have support professionals who might come in and help them with activities of daily living. It really runs the gamut, but the thing that unites all of our members is that they're committed to the notion of community inclusion for people with disabilities.
That is so great. So how to foster collaboration and engagement to address some of the challenges that this sector faces?
I think that's a huge question that's always totally front of mind for us. And I think for us, the biggest way that we do that is by engaging people in advocacy and helping mobilize them, lifting up their voices to ensure that the public policy landscape works in a way that we have a lot of different strategies for that. But the number one reason why people join us is for our advocacy at the federal level. So we often are engaged in member education.
Okay.
We have a weekly policy briefing every Friday where you can just hop on a Zoom during your lunch break and listen in for 15 minutes or less to hear what the latest is. We have action alerts where we are regularly mobilizing tens of thousands of people to contact their members of Congress. We have events that are geared toward ensuring that members of Congress and other lawmakers are aware of the challenges facing community providers and the people they support. This fall, for example, we're hosting our annual policy summit. So we really take a no long door approach to understanding how we can raise people's voices and connect them with one another, because we think that together, the sum of what we're doing is greater than any of its individual parts.
That's great. So I saw that your mission centers around supporting community-based providers to promote inclusion and empower individuals with disabilities. And one of the things that you just mentioned that I think is really important, it's how to engaging all of your stakeholders, which is hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for an association to do that because we hear about how you advocate on the Hill and everything, but what about healthcare professionals and reaching out to them and the public to raise awareness and advocate, because it's not just the Hill, right? It's society.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's everything. I always push back if anybody will ask, who's your audience for a particular message? And sometimes people will say the general public. And I always want to push back on that, because from a communications perspective, you can't target the general public, right? At the same time, though, we really do need the general public to understand not only what people with disabilities are capable of, but also that the types of accommodations or services or supports that they might need in order to be included in their community doesn't just happen by happenstance, right? But there is a concerted effort with a lot of people working often invisibly to ensure that people are able to access the benefits of community. So it's public awareness raising efforts.
Right.
We have a 501c3 foundation
Okay.
that does a lot of storytelling. For example, I am regularly talking to our state provider association leaders about how they can amplify the voices, not only of their members, but also the people they support, their family members, how they can engage with community partners. You mentioned healthcare professionals. Another group of people that I think about is employers, because so often there are no shortage of people with disabilities who are eager, willing, and ready to work.
Yes.
But you also have to have employers who understand the value of tapping into more diverse, often untapped workforce.
Yes.
And so really, I think a lot of the challenge is how do we identify the right message for the right audience at the right time? But then how do we build the capacity of our members to advance that message? So sometimes it's in the context of advocacy, but sometimes it's in the context of their networks within the community with other businesses. And so we try to take a more holistic approach to that and really support our members to raise their voice.
I love that. And I think it was Ernst & Young that I just read an article not that long ago talking about neurodiversity and how they have expanded their programs, and the statistics that were coming out of that were just so amazing and impressive. And their whole line of reasoning for doing this is do not just close the door on a group of individuals that you probably don't know what they're capable of doing. So I feel like that's such a great, you have a great point of employers.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know if it's the same research or not, but Ernst & Young also did a survey of employers and asked them, what percentage of your workforce do you think is composed of people with disabilities? And on average, employers reported that they thought about 4 to 7% was the answer. But when they surveyed employees and asked, what percent do you have a disability that impacts your ability to do your job on a day-to-day basis? And that number was 25%.
Wow.
And employers are clearly underestimating the role that disability is playing in the workplace. And I think it's a great reminder that when we talk about awareness, sometimes we're talking about things as simple as making sure that our communications are accessible. Or if we're having an event, making sure that event is accessible in a way that anybody who comes can fully participate. There are so many barriers that we tend not to think about because we think about disability in very narrow terms.
Yes.
And I think when you consider intellectual, developmental, cognitive disabilities and other forms of neurodivergence, if you're not a person with a disability, you are probably related to one in your immediate family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you feel like there's a lessening of a taboo of people discussing it? Because I will say that I have an 11-year-old and her 3 best friends have learning disabilities, and there's no taboo. There's nothing like versus maybe when I was in school.
Yeah.
And I like to think that, I don't know, humanity's getting better as we continue to move up. Do you feel like it's going in the right direction, that people chatting about it, talking about it, it's nothing to be shying away from? Do you feel that way?
I do think we're making a lot of progress on that front. And I am really heartened by the youngest generations.
Yes.
Because they really are looking at difference from a different perspective. And whereas my generation and folks who are older than me remember a time when those kinds of differences needed to be explained away.
Yes.
I do think that there is an embracing of it and the recognition that this is not some niche corner of the population. At the same time, unfortunately, we see discourse that devalues people with disability. And although that is also a smaller segment of the voices that are out there, they can sometimes be the voices that have the biggest microphones.
Yes.
And even though I see signs of progress, I think that there is still so much more work to be done.
Absolutely.
And again, not to just tie it back to my own association, but not just work to be done in making people more accepting, but work to be done in making people understand that inclusion and accessibility and helping people feel a sense of belonging sometimes requires significant but meaningful and worthwhile investments of time, money, and energy.
That's a very important message. I love that. So I recently read about some legislation to prepare for this. S 1332.
I love it.
So can you tell me and our listeners more about the significance of it and how it addresses the workforce crisis for direct support professions?
Yeah, no, I love that you were doing that level of research and stumbled upon this because this is critical work that is seeing progress in a way we've never seen before. So S 1332 is formally known as the Recognizing the Role in Direct Support Professions Act, but we call it the SIGN, and I'll explain why. So we have a significant crisis in our field with recruitment and retention of direct support professions. These are the
Can I interrupt? Can you explain what the direct support professionals are?
Yep, that's what I was about to
Oh,
do.
sorry.
No, you're fine. So we call them DSPs, but they're the people who are on the front lines actually delivering the services that our members provide.
Okay.
If you think about if you need somebody to come into your home and help with getting ready in the morning because you have mobility challenges.
Yes.
A DSP is a person who is doing that.
Okay.
If you need some coaching to be ready for the workforce, whether it's to find a job or to build the skills to keep that job coach is a direct profession. Ps are people who are providing a whole array of different services that go beyond the traditional notion of care. But because the way that they're paid is really contingent on how states reimburse providers in the Medicaid program, which is a whole really unsexy conversation that I won't bore you with. Those direct support professionals are severely underpaid. I think nationally, at the median, a direct support professional is earning about $14 an hour. And that's only been in the last year or two because there were a number of efforts to increase pay in response to the pandemic.
Okay.
Before that, the median pay was about $12 an hour. And in some states, it goes as low as $8.75 an hour.
Oh, wow.
And that's median. That's not a starting pay.
Oh, wow.
So even if you're a seasoned professional, you may be getting this really low salary. You may not have a lot of professional development opportunities, and you may not have access to great benefits. All of that has contributed to a workforce crisis. We have severe shortages of DSPs. Estimates put it at anywhere between 43 and 47% turnover rates nationally. And one of the things that has prevented us from making progress on this, and the reason for that is because the federal government does not recognize direct support professionals as an occupation. In the standard occupational code, that's the federal document that classifies every different profession that you can imagine. It's how we determine at the beginning of COVID which professions were considered essential workers. Things like that. The problem is that without a definition in the standard occupational code for direct support professionals, those professionals end up getting lumped in with home health aides, personal care attendants, other workers who are doing essential work, but work that is often very different from the role of direct support. If it ultimately is passed by Congress and signed into law, would it establish what is called a standard occupation classification within that?
Okay.
So it's an SOC, which is why we call it the SOC bill.
Okay. All right. I like that. I certainly hope that does get passed because that does seem something like it is very necessary.
Yeah, we're really optimistic. So the bill actually had unanimous support in its committee in the Senate. So we call it the Senate HISGAC committee, but it's Homeland Security and Government Affairs. They had a hearing for it about 2 weeks ago. And it received unanimous support. So it still needs to go to the Senate. And then it needs to obviously pass the House and then go through conference before reaching President Biden's desk. But I think we've been advocating with some of our coalition partners for this legislation for about 8 years. And this is easily the furthest along it's ever gotten. So we're hopeful, we're optimistic. We know that there's still a long road ahead, but my gosh, I'll tell you, we were excited to be able to report that out to our members.
Definitely. And the fact that it was unanimous support
Yeah.
and Capitol Hill in the same sentence is a really big achievement. So congratulations.
How many things can you say that when there's a bipartisan group of actors involved?
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's really been forward on our DNA, is recognizing that disability doesn't need to be an issue.
Of course not.
And there are all kinds of ways that the issues do get politicized, of course. But the reality is we all know somebody with a disability and we are not somebody. And so we have been successful in finding really helpful congressional champions and unlikely.
Yes, I think that's great. So I know that the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, celebrated its 33rd anniversary this year. Your work aligns with its vision of promoting inclusion for people with disabilities. Can you tell us about your advocacy efforts in support of upholding the ADA and the promises they made?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of our advocacy in some way or another relates back to that workforce crisis, because if we don't address that crisis, we can't dream about supporting more people, improving the quality of services, and thinking about a future that we might not even be able to imagine in this moment.
Right.
And so really, when you think about the promises of the ADA, none of them can truly be carried out unless there is a workforce of people there to support them.
Right.
Now, we've done a lot of things that make an important difference that don't require anything that's staffing intensive, right? We've adapted a lot of our built environments to be accessible for somebody who loses a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
But there is so much work that goes into the ability of a person to be included in the community and to be able to interact like you and I do. That requires a little bit of support. And so if we don't address that workforce crisis, then all of that other stuff is
right.
Right?
And I love the phrasing that you said, we can't even dream about,
What
what's next.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And then beyond that, there is so much that we do to try and shape not just federal policy, but we also think about federal regulations. So weighing in when the Biden administration, for example, proposes a set of rulemaking. One example of that, in March, we saw the implementation deadline for what is known as the H2BS setting. And again, I'll spare you a bunch of unsexy details. But the short version of a long story is that was created in response to legislation that passed 9 years ago that recognized that people with disabilities should have the right to live in the most integrated and least restrictive settings possible.
Yes.
And really wanted to work closely with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to develop this to ensure that it was not only issued with the needs of people with disabilities in mind, but also with the unique needs of intellectual mental disabilities in mind, and with an understanding that there are certain provisions of that we as a community of providers are fully committed to. But if we don't have the qualified workforce to deliver the services, then once again, it's point. So really thinking about how do we ensure that lawmakers and regulators, community leaders are understanding and aware of and sensitive to the way that this workforce crisis is putting up barriers to the promises of the.
This is great. And the other thing I would love to just hear about is your organization is 50 plus years old, correct?
Yep.
That's pretty impressive to begin with. And so you've had half a century of working on policy and sharing solutions. And I'm sure you've witnessed significant transformations in the landscape of disability services. Looking ahead, what are some of the key priorities and initiatives that your organization is focused on?
That's a great question. And I think some of the answers are probably really unique to us. And then some of them are probably the same things that association professionals in any industry are grappling with and will be grappling with. So for us, of course, it's addressing that workforce crisis.
Yes.
Making the case for deeper investments in the professionals people are interested in that.
Yes.
It's also thinking about what are the opportunities for community inclusion that either we're aware of, but created because we don't have the staffing, or what are the things that, like I said earlier, we're not even thinking. On top of that, I think that we're also keenly aware that there are some fundamental shifts in the way we conduct business that are happening. And so we are looking at to how do we be nimble and prepare for those sorts of shifts?
Yeah.
So I think about the role that artificial intelligence is already playing and will be playing not only in our workplaces, but also in the delivery. How are shifts in preferences coming out of the pandemic about when people work? How do we make sure that as the older generations of leaders retire, we're doing succession that supports younger generations of leaders to really take the reins and be engaged to grow this community? But also, how do we adapt to the fact that they bring their own sets of expectations that may be different from those of previous generations? So I think we're probably in a lot of ways thinking about a lot of things that are not unique or different. We're just trying to re-engineer those ideas in different contexts, sometimes successfully, but sometimes by borrowing from other industries or connecting with other professionals, which is precisely the value of why we come to events. Certainly is it gives us those opportunities to take a step back and just think different.
This has been great. I love this conversation. I know our listeners will as well. Now we have what we call the fun portion. And just to let our audience get to know you in a lightning round style. So where did you grow up?
So I'm originally from the suburbs of Chicago.
Okay.
Although I moved to the Florida Panhandle when my dad retired from teaching, and I was in middle school.
Okay.
So you'll hear a few y'alls in there, but you'll also hear some parties. People think I might be from Minnesota or Wisconsin, but it's the Chicago area.
I like both of those places.
Yep.
What is your Starbucks order?
Ordinarily, it's really boring. I'm grande pike, just black.
I know, but the Starbucks people must love you.
They probably do. And I'm sure I make them a lot more money than I should be. But I will say that when it's just in the middle of the dog days of summer, or if you're in Atlanta in August, for example, then I've got to switch it up because hot coffee does not heat.
Yes.
So in that case, we're talking generally like a venti, sugar-free, vanilla sweet cream brew.
Oh, that is my
which
favorite.
I can just slurp down and then.
That is my favorite.
Yeah.
And I was hesitant to jump on the cold coffee bandwagon at
Right.
first because I was a black coffee drinker and I thought, oh, I don't want any of this fancy stuff. Then I had one and it's like a love affair.
And I don't need it too fancy, but it's funny. I drink my hot coffee black, but if it's iced, it's got to be with some cream and a little sweetness.
Yes, me too. Me too. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still work?
I would absolutely still work, but I admit that it might look a little different.
Yeah.
So I say I would certainly still work because I love what I do. I'm so fortunate to have found a career doing what I find personally fulfilling.
Yes.
And also be the living.
Yes.
At the same time, I think if I had resources, I would probably take some risks, and that could look like consulting or something where I get to work on the issues I'm currently working on.
Yes.
But I could also branch out and work on issues that are important to me that might be a little bit beyond the disabilities.
Okay. I love that answer. And then I have to say, for most of the people that we have asked this question, no one says no, that they would just stop working. And I love that. I just feel like it speaks to the passion of pretty much people like you and everybody that we have spoken to, which is great.
Well, I'm guessing that you interview a lot of do-gooders.
Yeah.
Right? Nonprofit and association leaders tend to be in this work, not for the glamour
or the money. Yes.
But because it really is a purpose that drives.
Yes, it's so true. So what is the last show you binge watched?
I don't want to admit how many shows I've been binging lately, but I will give you two answers. One that I'm currently in process with is Better Call Saul.
Oh, I love that.
I recognize I might be like the last one to the party, but here we are. I'm really enjoying it. I'm just about to wrap season 2.
And did you watch Breaking Bad before it?
I did, but after was
me too.
I probably finished Breaking Bad about a year ago. Loved it.
So good.
Wasn't sure if I was gonna love Better Call
Agree.
Saul.
Yes.
It was a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, but now I am totally hooked and I am ready. The thing that I most recently finished, and although it was a rewatch, was all 7 seasons of Beat. And I just forgot how well that show mimics reality in its attempt to poke fun at the reality.
Yes.
So it's funny, it's cringy, it's just all of the best things that you want in a comedy.
Yes. And you can't really go wrong with Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
She's incredible.
Yeah. Food you can't live without.
My wife would say that I am a cookie monster, and I can't necessarily disagree with that. Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, snickerdoodle, peanut butter.
I do love cookies
white chocolate
too.
Macadamia. I'm here for them all. If there was like a reception and there was a tray of cookies, I would not be able to be anywhere near it because I would keep going back for seconds, thirds, fourths, 27ths.
Yes. And last question, what's your bucket list travel destination?
Oh, I have a lot, but I am going to say Thailand.
Oh.
I have wanted to go for a really long time. We actually had been flirting with the idea before the pandemic, and we all know how our plans in 2020 went.
Yes.
But I have a few friends who've been recently, and between the ocean and the beaches and the mountains and the
Does seem to have
elephants and
everything.
food,
Yes.
I mean, it's got everything I'm after all in one place, and I think it's incredibly beautiful. And so I would love one day to have the opportunity.
That sounds great. Sean, it was such a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you coming. It's been so much fun to interview you on the show floor, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Association 100 podcast, brought to you by the A100 publishing team, powered by Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications. You can subscribe to the Association 100 podcast on Spotify so you'll never miss out, or listen via our website at theassociation100.com. Follow us for all the latest insights and trends impacting the world of associations. Thanks for tuning in.